Hello, this is Grandpa Roger on the occasion of Father's Day 2025. I decided to make a greeting from me to my children and my grandchildren. I'm going to focus on my fathers and my grandfathers. The oldest of these, Grandpa Clausen, was born in 1888. And what I remember about him was that they lived in Portland. We lived in Gresham. And he took the bus from 37th and Broadway down to where he worked in Portland. I also am going to have a thread throughout this video. Speaking of hands, so I'm going to talk about a little bit about what each one of my father figures did with their hands. Grandpa Clausen was a golfer, maybe not a very good golfer, but he was a golfer. And in his basement, he had egg cartons filled with golf balls. So he would walk the golf courses looking for balls, come home, clean them up, and then store them by the type of golf ball. The other thing I remember about he and his hands was that he worked at a butcher shop or a fish market. So we used to call him Nick in the Fish. And for those young people waiting for Thanksgiving dinner where Grandma had a perfect table set, he would spend a lot of time sharpening his knife to get it just right. And this young lad in the 1950s was anxious. He wanted to get that chicken leg or the turkey leg because I was old enough to eat it. So I kept wanting him to hurry up so he could carve the turkey so I could get my turkey leg. Now I'm moving to my grandfather Townsend, who was born in 1892. He lived next door to us in Gresham. So I saw him more frequently than I saw Grandpa Clausen. What I remember about E.P. Townsend was that he was a whistler. He also was called E.P. instead of Eddie Pecos Townsend. I remember that he was a gardener. He worked outside. He had planted things. He kept a cemetery going. He was a landscaper for a cemetery. He was also the landscape person for the grade school. So a shovel was what he had in his hand. Another thing I remember in his hand from about the 1950s was dynamite. You may wonder, how come I remember dynamite? Well, he worked at a cemetery and he would get a contract every now and then to go to a different cemetery and dig the grave for them. So I think it was a Saturday, not sure, he took me with him, a young lad, and we got in his car and we took a shovel and a long, skinny steel pole with a sharp point on it. And we were going to go dig a grave. I'd never dug a grave before in my life. I knew it had to be 6 feet deep. So he dug a little bit and then made the 6 foot by about 3 foot hole. And then the ground got hard, so we took out his bar and went bang, put some holes around down deep. And then he took some dynamite out of the back of the car, dropped it down each one of these holes that he had made. And then we walked over to the car and he had wired each one of these over and he opened the hood, or maybe it was under the seat, but we got to the battery and he touched it and boom. And then he would go up and dig the hole out some more. And then if it wasn't deep enough, we'd have another blast of dynamite. Now, I don't know that my mother actually knew what was going on. I don't know that I ever told her that a young lad was with his grandpa and we were digging holes with dynamite. Now I move on to the next generation, and there'll be 3 father figures. My birth father was born in 1921. Goes by the initials of RWC. He used to be Big Roger, but then I got to be bigger than he, so it got a little confusing about when somebody called on the phone whether they wanted Big Roger or Old Roger. But so what I remember about my father was his craftsman ability. He did painting, he did woodworking. He worked for a place where they made windows, and his hands were not anywhere near like mine. They were scratched. They were full of dark material. He could not get them clean. He used to wash his hands in paint thinner. They're not open sores, but really heavy, rough hands. The other piece I remember about his hands is that he was the leader of our family in a biblical sense. So he always read the Bible. He had a Bible. I've even have a copy of the one he had that said, had his name and inscribed from my grandmother Townsend. So I don't know when it was presented, but she gave him a Bible, not the family Bible per se, just a normal Bible that's well used. The next person that is a father figure for me, and it kind of because of my divorce, I moved over and became acquainted with my wife's father. Darrell Fleming, D.C. Fleming, was born in 1920. What I remember about him as far as the hands, which is the thread going through here, was that he wore gloves. He was a businessman, started a business, kept it going. It was an oil distributor. So when he went to work, he put on gloves so that he wouldn't bring the oil smell and the gasoline smell into the house. Also did that with his shoes. So I learned a lot of things about being a small businessman from him. The other thing I remember about where his hands were, they were either on a tiller of a boat, or on the sail of a boat. So as he went through business and as I began to know him, he wanted to retire at 50, didn't quite make it. One of the things he wanted was a boat. So he and I would, even before I was married, would go to the Columbia River and sail on a small boat. Then he got a little bigger boat. Then he got a little bigger boat than that. And then he moved to the Puget Sound. So things I remember were his gloves and the sailing that he did. The other father figure came along, Lee Irwin. He was born in 1919. Now, I knew him before he was really my stepfather because I went to work for him at the Gresham Outlook. So what I remember about his hands were he was a publisher of the Outlook, and so on the typewriter, but he didn't have the standard way that a secretary would type. He kind of used his fingers in a weird way, kind of hunting and pecking, but pretty fast at it. So when I would need to talk to him, he'd be in the publisher's office typing away. The other thing I remember about him has to do with the ink. The day the paper was printed, some of my stepbrothers and sisters would come down and help stuff the papers and get them ready to be distributed. And he would get the first paper off the press, and then because it was the first one off the press and ink wasn't dry, he'd have ink on his hands. So those are the people that I wanted on this Father's Day for the rest of you to know, not in total, but just a little bit of a story from me, and I'm passing it on through a video to you. The other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to say I love you to Nick and to Amy and to Katie and to Sarah and to Caitlin and Ian. You mean a lot to me, and I'm very glad to be your grandfather and your father. Have a great rest of the day, rest of the year, rest of your life. Love you forever.